Thanks everyone for joining. Something like implementing resource management strategies is a pretty wide topic. What we have in the agenda is really the kind of like a highlight of the 4 points of why do you do resource management. So I'm just going to jump into the meat of it. The big thing about resource management, I'm going to taking the approach of resource scheduling on this, by the way. The big thing about resource management is understanding what resources you need to fulfill what projects are coming. So a lot of it is guesswork, a lot of it is forecasting. So you're not necessarily dealing with objective, solid information. It's information that's always in flux. So one of the things that people consider in resource scheduling is how solid is the information, how probable, I guess I should say, is the information. So if I hear on the street that I'm getting a big project next week, I probably won't hold that as a highly probable thing until I, have talked to the customer and I've gone through an RFP process and I've gotten some kind of indication that they know who the heck I am, right? So there's information that's very solid, and then there's information that's very loose because it's early understanding, early knowledge. And all of that plays into planning resources, because you don't necessarily want to overhire and not have the work to deliver, but you also have a hard time delivering work when your resources are completely blocked and more work keeps coming in. So that resource management, I think, is one of the harder things in managing a business, because you ideally want that perfect just-in-time hiring approach, and that's almost impossible. I think it's almost impossible to get. So it's always a kind of a shell game along the way. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about two basic structures that you could approach in OpenAir, and a lot of it has to do with the types of business that you do, the types of projects you do, and the size of the projects that you support. The first one I'm going to talk about is what I call the basic resource need management. Real basic. What you're doing is you're tracking projects in an early stage, meaning, hey, I think this project's going to come in. I don't know who would work on it yet. It's probably too early to even earmark somebody. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a pin in it and say, I need a consultant. And I'm just going to schedule a consultant to do that work. And a lot of times people will use the resource bookings feature, the resource module, to do those early projects, early tracking. Now, how do you track an early project? Some of you have this opportunity to do this in OpenAir, and some of you don't, depending on what systems your OpenAir is connected to. For those of you who have a connection to like a sales system, like a Salesforce or a NetSuite CRM, then you probably have the ability to bring in projects at some stage in the sales cycle so that you have a preview of what's coming and you have a way to do early staffing against that. And in the basic model, what the early staffing does is it actually just schedules people against the project, but you're letting the project stage indicate the fact that this is an early project. So in the two screenshots here I have, and this is actually how TopStep is scheduling their resources, we have a full life cycle of projects as we're tracking them. So even the minute, we talk to you about potentially doing an engagement, that's a qualified lead for us. And then it just goes through the sales cycle, ideally going through the whole thing instead of falling into the lost no response. But that qualification and proposal stages that you see here on the screen, those are our way of saying, quote unquote, soft bookings or tentative bookings or early bookings, because we know when we're staffing somebody to those projects, they're not real. And there's, of course, ways that you can use the filter sets and stuff in OpenAir so that you can prevent people from seeing those type of early scheduling activities, simply because it's part of the business to track forecasting, but it's not necessarily something you want to inform individuals on quite yet. Now, I call this basic because what you're doing is this is a project-centric scheduling model where things are coming in, they're not real projects, so I'm putting in sort of pipeline or forecast scheduling. And the pro for this is all you have to do is put the booking in. You don't have to maintain the booking other than moving the dates as you need to. But when a project is signed and turned into, in our case, the live stage, then that booking is sort of a committed booking because we've already decided that this work's going to get done. So you don't have to go back and sort of maintain additional information on the booking. You just have to keep those dates up to date because that's the basics of scheduling, of course. The con of this, though, is for those of you who have larger projects, our projects are not necessarily huge. We don't have 10, 15 people on a single project or more. We usually have a handful of people. And when the project starts, everyone's engaged, and there we go. This basic model works well for us because of the size of our projects and the type of our business. For some of you on the call, this does not fit nicely because you have large projects. They could go multi-month, multi-year, and you have, sort of mini companies on the project as a team already, 15, 20, 25 people. So you have a need to be able to track potential resources for that signed work. So you need to understand where there are people missing from being able to get scheduled. So, sort of tentatively putting people onto projects and not necessarily knowing if that's going to get approved or not. Maybe there's scope changes. So some of you, this basic model may be the best. It's a low maintenance model, low administration model, but it doesn't necessarily fulfill all the needs for larger projects, larger companies that have to track sort of what's missing, where the gaps are, and do I have scope changes along the way. So that brings me to what I call resource centric. I certainly don't mean it, it's not like advanced or anything, it's just a different way of doing things. And what this does is it adds the layer of, hey, is this individual somebody that's going to be working on the project or not? By definition, when you put a resource on a booking in the system, and some of you may have renamed this term booking to allocations or staffing or assignments, or those are all different terms. When you put somebody on a booking, by nature of that, it is a resource-centric booking, but the booking itself can have this concept of a booking type, where you're scheduling the resource, but you're basically tagging that individual schedule piece as what kind of scheduling piece is it. This is very native for some of you because you may have come from a spreadsheet that was color-coded. I see it all the time. Resources on the left-hand side, timeline across the top, and then there's green and blue and red and the customer names in there, and whether they're on-site or remote or tentative, or so the color coding becomes a big thing. So natively, a lot of people will move from that model into OpenAir with a booking and booking type approach so that you can tag the booking with different categories. There are a lot of pros to using this. One is you can actually use the booking types also in filter sets, similar to the project stage from the previous example. So if you want to do sort of a tentative, I misspelled tentative, I realize that on the screen, how embarrassing. The tentative, if you want to do tentative booking types, but not let people see them so that they don't have to worry about the fact that you're doing the shell game and shuffling underneath the covers, you can limit their visibility to those booking types by a filter set. It is resource focused, so each individual booking itself has a booking type. And it is something that you can update in the run in action or bulk editor so that you can flip things very quickly. A project that gets signed can basically take all of the tentative bookings and flip them to confirmed in one, couple of checkbox actions, okay? And additionally, if you're using anything like the planner or the chart view in OpenAir, all of those support basically color coding by booking types. So now the booking types can pop a little bit more, not only by the word, but also by color scheme so that you can see which things are confirmed or tentative as you're looking at those different features in the system, okay? I do find that there's one big con with using booking types, and that is they don't take care of themselves. So if you put a bunch of bookings in and they're all tagged as tentative or tentative, according to my spelling, those are going to stay that way until somebody comes along and says, oh, wait, the project was signed like 2 months ago. I should probably flip these to confirmed. So it's the maintenance of data like this that as we work with you, as we roll out resource management, one of our big questions is, will people keep the data up to date? And that flows into some things we'll talk about later on regarding the fact that the more accurate the information, the more reliable, of course, the output of the data. So you really wanted that check and balance of, information in and information out. Okay. So going along that line, that's the two basics. We could go into lots of different options and features on how to get the bookings in the system, but I chose to take an approach with this webinar to say, okay, so if I sort of understand the definition of the bookings to put in, how can I understand what kind of people I will need? So if we do sort of that planning, that folds into forecasting, and then forecasting inevitably means I need a type of person. Oftentimes, the best way to do that is if you can use what's called a generic resource. It's not a real user. It's not a user account in the system. It's basically a type of, it's a name. It's a name in the system that's you set up. You can have as many generics as you want, but quite often you name it what kind of resource you need, developer, or maybe you could say Java developer if you need something more detailed, project manager. We use NetSuite OpenAir consultant. You know, those are all generic, so that if I schedule that generic to a project, I know what kind of resource I need. There are skill profiles and ways that you can set up generics to have a whole skill profile and rely on skill profile or skill elements in searches that are available, the advanced resource search, where there's some enhancements that's released in that. That's a secondary layer. But at a very basic level, if you call the generic the type of resource that you need, that gives you insight into how much or what kind of resources you need to fulfill the job when it gets actually signed by the customer. So if I use something very simple like a generic tagging like this developer, integration consultant, a NetSuite OpenAir consultant, a project manager as placeholders, then I can actually run a report with some color coding that can tell me, you know, maybe percentages, or in this case, this is hours, and I have it color coded. How many hours do I need of these type of generic resources week over the next few weeks, and basically what projects are coming in. And I could even add like what stage are those projects in, so I could see, you know, are they proposals, are they signed work, I'm still waiting for things to come in. So these generics, this is sort of my gap, like this is my demand. I need to figure out how I'm going to supply this demand. And I actually built this report. If you're not familiar with it, this is a summary or a cross-tabbed report. And it's actually not the company summary report. It is the user summary report. So it always starts at the user base. And I've subtotaled it by project. And then I used a feature on it called color coding, where I put just number ranges in the color coding. And I said suppress the color coding on the subtotals. So that way I don't get a lot of gobbledygook colors below the main line. The main line is what I'm staring at. I'm looking to see what's above 40 or 64, what's lower than 20, so I could probably squeeze that out of existing resources. Okay. So if you have more questions, if you haven't sort of seen this kind of setup before with the suppressing subtotals, feel free to email us. We'll answer some questions on that. Okay. But you can see how quickly this actually is quite helpful, because I can see, boy, that NetSuite OpenAir consultant, I need a lot of them very soon. You know, starting next week, I need a ton of them. So where am I going to find those resources? And then gives you the ability to look for hiring needs, or then compare this to your actual resource availability to see who could fill those holes as things go forward. Now, communication is another big one. So as you're forecasting, of course, forecasting is something management tends to focus on. Department leads, that kind of thing, where they're trying to figure out where their resources are going to be put. But then, of course, you have to communicate that down to the individual. So I'm a big proponent of self-view dashboards, self-view reports, so that people have information pushed out to them, that they have quick view of what's coming up for them. So even in our system, we have a resource book. What are you working on in the next few weeks? Some of you on the call may be saying, or listening to this webinar, may be saying, well, they can just go into the planner and see that, and that's very true. But the dashboard is something that you can build a bunch of dashboards together and push out sort of a self-service dashboard that I'm going to talk about in a couple of slides, so that you add not just this one, but a couple of different things that gives them a quick view of, what's next on their plate. And you can add color coding, as I did here on this example on the screen. And then this one, I did not suppress the color coding below, so I could pop those things to the individual of, where is the focus, which project is the focus. And the time off is always a great focus, isn't it, for folks? Now, I get this question a lot, like, how did I do that? How can I set up a report or a dashboard for each person? But I've got like 1,000 people. How do I not kill myself over a weekend and try to set up all this stuff for individuals? So there's actually a very simple way to set up one report that everyone can leverage and see, to run and to see on dashboards. And it's a combination of using this thing called a self-view filter set and the bulk user wizard. If you're not familiar with that, that's on the home module in the wizard style. So in order for you to actually set up a self-service dashboard set for people, first you define a self-service or self-view filter set. That is simply a filter set that's dedicated to have a user access of myself. I don't care what else you filter it on, but it at least has to have user access to myself. Then you define reports that you want, like utilization reports or that booking view report, future booking view report. And as part of the report, at the very bottom in the options or on the side with the settings section, depending on whether you're using the report management interface or not, you would have an option that says, I can define a special filter set just for this project. It is not a detail filter area. It is actually a drop down that allows you to pick a filter set. If you don't have that option, it is a feature that you can turn on under the report options area of the global settings, okay? Once you save that report, now you want to share it with all the users in the company. The fact that you do that, which means anyone who runs it, the report controls the data view. So the report pays attention to the self view and it'll only return information for that individual that's running it, okay? So now we're halfway done. We've got reports shared to them. People can proactively go and run them themselves. However, what we want is we want dashboards. So what you should do is go create the dashboards for yourself, or if you're a person that's sort of an admin for the team and you don't have like billable utilization showing up because you're an administrator of OpenAir, you could proxy in as a person who should have some data so you can kind of validate that the dashboard's setting up right. And set up a dashboard report or chart or whatever you want on a single pane for individuals, verify that that looks good, and then go into the bulk user wizard. That's on the home module in the wizards tab, and you set the person that you used as your dashboard report chart. If it's yourself, great. If it's the person that you proxied in as, great. Use that as the copy from, and there is two dashboard options. There's copy and replace. The caution with replace is when you push replace, you wipe out anything anyone's already had and you replace it with what you're giving them. So of course, if this is the first time you're pushing stuff out, replace is a great option. It's nice and clean. But anytime after that, you would sort of be in the situation of using copy because you don't necessarily want to wipe out what somebody else has already done in the system. And when you're done with that, everyone now has access to the dashboard. You have to do it in this order. If you do it in any other order, people may see reports but not dashboards because they didn't see the reports before. Yeah, it's this order. And you can certainly request a copy of these slides to follow these steps. And as you're setting up the self-service dashboard, think about things that individuals need from a measuring metrics perspective. So quite often, folks in your organization, they need access to utilization or revenue targets or whatever they're necessarily being sort of measured against or held accountable to. So you can set up something like a self-view utilization dashboard in addition to, hey, what are you scheduled on for the next few weeks? And this way it gives them something to keep track throughout the quarter or the month, whatever the time frame is that they're being held accountable to, so that they can understand and plan for how do they achieve their goals at the end of the day. Now, management needs different types of metrics. And quite often these management metrics are things like who's not busy. That tends to sort of be the anti-utilization, who's not utilized, that I can fulfill those demand by skill type charts that I was just looking at, or demand by capacity. If we're forecasting a lot of projects coming in, do we have the headcount right now to deliver on them? If we're under by 10%, maybe we can fulfill it with subcontractors or people, you know, pulling a couple of long hours. But if you're starting to fall behind like a whole headcount or two headcounts on your demand, versus what you have on staff, you probably will have to hire. And by doing a forecast of skill needs based on the scheduling information and using those generics, you can see like where your highest demand is and start thinking about how you're going to bring more resources on board for that. And as a project manager, we're not leaving you out. You definitely have metrics that you want to measure, but your goal really is understanding the people that are on your project. Do they have potential conflicts? What else are they working on, so that you can sort of head off or anticipate managing the risk of your resources not being able to deliver fully on your project. Also understanding who else is available, because if there's a certain skill set you need or the resource you have is being pulled too many different ways, is there a potential for you to bring another resource on from the team to cover them or back them up? And this is where I'll put a plug in for the release. This screenshot here is the resource planner. For those of you who are using it, you may have run into challenges in being able to sort of get a big screen view of the planner. This is actually from our sandbox environment, and I'm using Firefox. So before, when I look at it now in production, I only see 2 rows. Now you can see I see up to 8 rows in the information. So much more depth here, and I definitely encourage you. You'll see it automatically if you have the planner. It's going to be pushed out on Saturday, so you'll get to see much more information when you roll it up this way. Okay, so I do still feel that the planner is a good tool to sort of roll it up and see who's available and who's not available. But of course, there's always reports like I've shown in previous parts of the presentation here. Okay. So that brings us back, basically wrapping it up to what we've all talked about throughout this slide deck here, is really determining what's the best scheduling model that's going to fit the type of business you have and the speed or the size of the projects that you have. Some of you have very small, quick projects, so the basic scheduling model would work probably really well for you. Others have large government contracts that have 10 people on them over multiple years, and maybe the resource-centric version or even a more detailed version may be more effective for you, because you may have to tag more information on with the forecasting aspect of it. Either way, you'll have to set up OpenAir to be able to track your resources by the different types. In the basic model, remember, it was like by project stage, and having some kind of project stage cycle that sort of would feed both managing your project life cycle as well as your scheduling commitments. But if it's larger projects, you may have to introduce things like booking types, but be able to maintain that booking type for accurate data. Consider the type of people who need to consume this information. Scheduling is something that resource schedulers, if that's their whole job, that's what they live for. But understand that the people who are being scheduled need to know what they're scheduled on, and the people who are managing the company need to know, what people are scheduled on and what kind of hiring needs they have. So that it definitely is a central piece of information that lots of people have to consume. And the consumption of that is really making sure that people are adopting whatever process you have in place so that they have faith and trust in the data that they're seeing. So, you don't want to go and hire 10 people and you find out, oh, somebody just didn't update their data. That would be awful. So monitoring adoption is a big thing that comes back to sort of the administrator role. And like I said, in a half hour, it's kind of hard to hit all the different aspects of resource management. But we hope in this short period of the webinar, you've been able to sort of see some things to think about as even with the way that you're doing resource scheduling today.